a text from Michelle Carter.
Yes.
Could you please read it?
He called me and I heard like muffled sounds and some type of motor running, and it was like that for 20 minutes and he wouldn't answer. I think he killed himself.
It is the morning of July 12th, 2014. 18-year-old Conrad Roy is about to spend a day at the beach, after which he'll return home, take his sisters out for ice cream, walk the dog, and upon relentless urging from his girlfriend Michelle Carter, he will take his own life. You may have already heard about the girl from Plainville, as she's sometimes dubbed, or in other circles perhaps just as that small-town Massachusetts girl who got her boyfriend to kill himself over text message. She's that girl who loved kayaking, was known to obsess over the once popular television show Glee, and who had few real friends, if any at all. She is Michelle Carter, the 17-year-old who struck at least several of her female peers as being too clingy. They alleged that she would often start texting other girls that barely knew her, and more often than not, Michelle's repeated forced attempts to form friendships this way would backfire, seeing as this served to make others feel strangely about her. Hence, she was perhaps also the lonely girl who longed for attention and acceptance, maybe in a way so strong that it defies the average person's comprehension. She's also the girl who in February of 2015 was indicted and arraigned on charges of involuntary manslaughter, and who in 2017 would stand trial for her alleged involvement in her boyfriend's suicide. In the physical sense, Michelle Carter wasn't even there. But as the prosecution would argue, allegedly she had been there through electronic communication for days, weeks, even longer, pushing him to take his own life, and even coaching him on how to commit an irreversible act she'd once even made him promise to carry out. At the crux of Michelle's trial was always the question of who or what would be the ultimate persuader of Conrad Roy. Was it a sadistic girlfriend, or the demons that had taken root inside the mind of an already troubled teenage boy? My hope is that by presenting these messages to you, it may help to shed some light on the situation. My hope is for viewers to arrive at their own conclusions. What follows is thus a presentation of all the text messages the two teens exchanged, beginning roughly about 12 hours before the world would say goodbye to 18-year-old Captain Conrad Roy III. 40,000 plus messages later, this is the way that the dialogue between Michelle Carter and Conrad Roy would finally end. On this night, July 12th, Conrad would manage to leave his house somewhere in the ballpark of 6:20 p.m. Conrad would next climb into his pickup truck, and finally, about 40 miles away from home in Fairhaven, Massachusetts, Conrad would pull into the parking lot of a Kmart and park his truck there. Beginning at 7:12 p.m., a phone call would resume between Conrad and Michelle. This final call, along with witness testimony, would turn out to be the prosecution's most damning piece of evidence against Michelle Carter. This call would last for 47 minutes, and by the end of it, the teen boy would be dead. There, in that parking lot, his own loving girlfriend listening in, Conrad would power up the generator. Slowly, its lethal fumes would start to seep into the cab, and Conrad's lungs would commence breathing in the toxic emissions. Except that when he felt the effects of the carbon monoxide start to take hold, Conrad would at once start to have second thoughts. With Michelle still listening in, Conrad would pull open the door and immediately exit the truck. It was in this simple and instinctive act whereby Conrad was communicating that, for whatever the reason, that was not an environment he wanted to inhabit any longer at that time. But why then, nonetheless, would Conrad's lifeless body come to be discovered inside the truck on the very following day, July 13th? Well, enter for a moment the girl who might be described as the DA's star witness, Samantha Sam Boardman. For a while there, Sam served as Michelle's shoulder to cry on, but then months later, Sam would take the stand in court, and she would read aloud the text messages in which Michelle had detailed the way in which Conrad Roy went from being safe outside his vehicle, frightened, to being back inside, lifeless. While it's unknown whether Michelle coaxed her boyfriend sweetly to try again, or else whether she aggressively bullied him into it, there's one thing that is for certain. After Conrad had, perhaps pretty narrowly, escaped his vehicle that night, Michelle nonetheless instructed him to get back in. On September 15th of that same year, Michelle had sent a text which read, verbatim, "His death is my fault. Honestly, I could have stopped him. I was on the phone with him, and he got out of the car because he got scared, and I told him to get back in." And later on in that same rambling text, Michelle would also reiterate in her own words, "I could have stopped him, but I didn't. All I had to say was, 'I love you, don't do this just one more time,' and he'd still be here." And so, despite his own looming reservations, Conrad would keep his promise to Michelle, and he would dutifully climb back into his vehicle and resume the attempt on ending his life. Throughout the final 20 minutes of that phone call, Michelle would be silent as she simply listened to him die. After she'd successfully persuaded him to get back in the truck, an act that Michelle knew with certainty would end her own boyfriend's life, she sat on the other end, hearing the whirring of the motor, the generator, and hearing him cough and gasp for air. As she would describe to Sam, she could even hear him moaning. For 20 minutes, she'd remain on the line, perhaps until she was certain the job was done, without saying a word. At 7:59 that night, her boyfriend gone, she would at last hit the button and end the call. Although she had been eerily quiet as she sat listening to his labored breathing as the life slowly eked out of him, her voice, that same one that had told him to get back in, would be the last voice that Conrad would ever hear. No one but Michelle would know it until the following day, but Conrad was now departed. In spite of this knowledge, in a couple of hours, Michelle would text his phone again. For about the next 2.5 months, even after his death, Michelle continued to text Conrad's phone. In many of these texts, she conveys to Conrad how much she misses him and that she hopes he's watching over her from heaven. On September 6, 2014, with this one final text.
This is Conrad Henry Roy III reporting. I need to, for personal growth, accomplish this sense of self-pride in myself. I have a lot going. I do have a lot going for me. Like, I'm like a fucking captain. I just got a job from the Boston Ducktors to captain their boat. Like, that's a huge accomplishment. To be a captain. Listen. You just have to get the cobwebs out. Turn the gears. The gears need to be turning. Turn them gears. That's what I gotta do. Cause look at me. I got nice teeth. Nobody's perfect. You just have to accept yourself as an individual.